This podcast is part of the Batman Universe Podcast Network, hosted by the BatmanUniverse.net. Check out everything related to Batman and the entire Bat family at the BatmanUniverse.net, including news and original content related to comics, movies, television, merchandise, video games, and more. Also, check out some of the other unique podcasts that TBU has to offer. Consider supporting this podcast by becoming a patron on Patreon. Even $1 can go a long way in supporting this content that you enjoy. Look for a link over at the BatmanUniverse.net to offer your support now. And now, on with the show.
Hi, this is Jim Lee, and you're listening to the Batman Universe Comic Podcast.
Hi, I'm Dan Jurgens, and you're listening to the Batman Universe.
Hey, this is Scott Snyder, and you're listening to the Batman Universe Comic Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Batman Universe Comic Podcast, episode number 284. I am your host Dustin, and today I have with me...
This is Steph.
And this is Ian.
And, well, let's just address the elephant in the room. Obviously, I have not been here for the last couple of episodes, and that is due to the fact that I've been working on a variety of different things for the site, which we will get into later. But the long and short of it is that there's going to be some changes coming to the Comic Cast in the coming months. And one of the things that is going to change is that I will no longer be on the Comic Cast. I will be stepping away from the Comic Cast after Batman number 85, which is Tom King's last issue on Batman. And I will be moving over to some other projects that I don't want to announce at this point in time at TBU, specifically just because we have to finalize anything and I don't really want to say anything before we get everything settled. But know that the Comic Cast is not going anywhere. We are going to be adding a third person to Steph and Ian already on the show. And the entire format of the show will be completely different. And the Comic Cast is kind of going to be going through what I like to call a metamorphosis of basically in a new direction. That's basically what it is going to be. I've been on the show for a very, very long time, and while I still enjoy keeping up with what's going on in the comics, there's a lot of other aspects that I also need to keep track of, and I'd like to discuss a little bit more that I will still be doing at TBU, but that is what I need to be focusing on more so than specifically the comics. If for those of you who haven't been around since the very beginning, I'm going to be a little bit honest for a moment, or completely honest for a moment, and say the Comic Cast was something that spawned from an idea from a former co-host that I was not necessarily super into in the first place. I was kind of convinced to do the Comic Cast, and the intent was, while for those who don't know the back history of TBU, we started with the TBU podcast, which covered all the news. Eventually we added some co-hosts besides me doing it as a solo show. And when I added co-hosts, we started covering the comics a little bit more. And we decided that we were going to start another show to focus more on the comics. That was, like I said, a suggestion from a former co-host where they thought this was a good idea. I was a little hesitant about it, and I went along with it because I could see the value of having a separate show dedicated to comics, because there'd be more time to discuss the things with the comics. This was also during the time where Batman R.I.P. was going on, and a variety of other things were in the works. So it was a good time to be discussing comics at length. Over the years, obviously, we've had a lot of different things come up in the comics. We had the New 52. We've had Convergence, which that's like a headache anytime I say that word. We had Rebirth. We've had DCU. Anybody remembers that? We've had all kinds of different stuff. And there's been rumors floating around that DC is potentially floating the idea, or at least working on the idea, of doing something else in the not so distant future. And the reality of it is, when we started the Comic Cast, I really enjoyed talking about what was currently happening. Over the years, there's been times where I haven't been super thrilled with what's been going on. Some of you out there who probably are not listening any longer have given numerous comments over the years talking about how negative the show has been. And that was always because I personally was not super into what was going on. And a lot of times the people surrounding me also didn't enjoy what was going on either. And while that is unfortunate, we've always been truthful. If we haven't liked something, we tell you we don't like it. If we do like something, we tell you we like it. And that's never going to change. We're not going to sugarcoat something and say this thing is amazing if it's an absolute piece of crap. So don't ever expect that from TBU, even if I'm not here. And over the years, that has just been something that we've had to deal with. During the New 52, there was a lot of really, really, really bad books. And for a really long time, the Comic Cast in general was extremely negative. And that was because the books were bad and we were not enjoying doing what we were doing. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to still keep up with what's going on in the comics. It's not meaning I'm leaving TBU at all. It just means I'm leaving this specific cast. I'm leaving it in the hands of Ian and Steph and the third host that will be coming on as well. And that's the plan. The show will because I'm leaving the show will change into something else. I no longer will be heading up the show. It won't have the same exact format that it currently has, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the episode. But the gist of it is that's part of the reason I've been gone is because TBU as a whole, we're going to be going through a metamorphosis and going in a new direction with a lot of the things that we are doing at TBU. Part of this has to do with the feedback we've gotten from some listeners and our audience in general, the people who head over the site and look at articles and read things. And part of it is just the necessity to kind of stand out amongst the crowd of so many different websites. So we will have a lot more details on a lot of that stuff in the near future. But starting immediately, the Comic Cast is going to have we're not going to have as much format. I will be on the next 4 episodes before I leave, but in the meantime, we're going to be covering things a little bit differently. So rather than running down the news and rather than doing Greater Gotham, we're going to be focusing heavily on the 2 books that we are covering currently, which is Detective and Batman. And we're going to be doing those reviews. We're going to be having discussion points if they're warranted for certain things within the news or the comic community and things like that. And we'll be discussing listener comments, if the need is there, but we're also going to be looking at making these episodes shorter. That is something that we're going to be starting immediately doing. And that is something that, with the new direction of the podcast, the episodes are going to be shorter as well. As far as frequency, at least for the next 2 months, you can expect 2 episodes per month, but there's no guarantee on how many episodes we'll be producing after that time, because we're still working out a lot of the details for the new direction. But I just want to say I have appreciated all of our listeners. I appreciate my current co-hosts Ian and Steph, as well as all of the past hosts that have been on the Comic Cast. And it's something that I've struggled with the decision of leaving, but it's something that I really need to do in order to make TBU succeed a little bit better and put my focuses elsewhere. So that's where I've been. That's what's happening. And now we're going to jump straight into the books. And we're going to start off with Batman.
Batman number 82, written by Tom King, art by Mikel Janin. The book opens with Bane and Batman agreeing to no masks before they face off. The book then cuts to Wayne Manor, where the ventriloquist gets smacked after asking Thomas Wayne if he requires anything, and Thomas responds that he requires his boy, and walks away. Batman removes his belt and shirt as he tells Bane, "No help," saying it is not Catwoman's city or fight. Bane proceeds to remove the pump that feeds venom into his body. Meanwhile, Thomas and the ventriloquist walk through Wayne Manor and into the Batcave, and past the unconscious bodies of the Bat family. Bane winds up to throw a punch, and finds that his wrist now has Catwoman's bullwhip wrapped around it. Batman strikes with 2 batarangs visibly taped to the small of his bat, admitting to Bane that he lied. Batman then throws the 2 batarangs, which cut into Bane, with Catwoman explaining that Bane doesn't use Gotham Girl's super venom because it would overload his system. However, he would need to remove his venom pump, which regulates the venom in his body. Otherwise, the batarangs coated in super venom wouldn't have an effect. Thomas walks through the destroyed Batcave to an open Batmobile. Bruce stands over Bane with Catwoman's whip around Bane's neck as she pulls him from behind. Batman tells Bane the venom will kill him, but he can save him and asks Bane if they are done. Bane speaks about his youth growing up in prison before yelling they are not done and launching himself at Batman. Ventriloquist pilots the Batmobile as Thomas checks his handgun. Catwoman pounces on Bane, scratching at his face with her claws. Bane hurls her off of him, slamming Catwoman into a wall. Batman tackles Bane from behind, smashing his face repeatedly into the floor, telling Bane he could kill him for what he has done, but instead declares he will break his damn back, as he lifts Bane over his head and readies to drive him down over his knee. However, a pair of gunshocks ring out, striking Batman in the stomach as he and Bane fall to the ground. Thomas Wayne Batman stands over both of them with a smoking gun. Bane tries to crawl towards Thomas and is shot through the head. The issue ends with Batman and Bane on the ground, bleeding, as Thomas tells Ventriloquist they have come to the end and to fetch the Psycho Pirate. So, this is a very straightforward issue in a lot of ways. It's kind of playing with a lot of the same kinds of tropes that Tom King has played with from the Nightfall story. What do you think about this Batman versus Bane fight, both in the context of Nightfall and in the context of this whole run? Because we've seen Batman fight Bane in I Am Suicide, where Bane beats him and breaks his back, and then he fixes it. And then we've seen Batman and Bane fight in I Am Bane, where he lets Bane beat him until he gets one shot to headbutt him, and then Bane just goes down. And then we see again during The Fall and the Fallen that Bane just trashes Batman and breaks his back again, and then Thomas takes him and fixes his back. So how does this Batman versus Bane fight play to you?
Obviously, this one plays out as if it's the final battle. This is Batman saying, "There's no holds bar. I'm going to do anything I possibly can to end this once and for all." He's tired of playing by the rules. That's why Catwoman's involved. That's why he's got batarangs attached to him. It's why he basically goads Bane into taking the venom out, and goads him into a fair fight, only to not be a fair fight. He's done playing games, and it makes sense. I think that Batman is played by the rules a little too many times and assumed Bane was always going to play by the rules, and as he has seen, Bane has never been playing by the rules no matter what. So it makes perfect sense that Batman would go to these lengths to ensure that he can win. And obviously he was about to right before this thing happened with Thomas.
Bane's never used the venom in any of these fights, has he?
I think he was on Venom during the Fall and the Fallen one.
It's just kind of interesting. Yeah, and so my first thought when I was reading it was, Batman can't lie, can he? And then I realized, no, Batman always lies. Batman's usually a big fat liar, so this actually makes sense. I'm getting a little bored. I mean, I understand, like, what is it, three times is usually a good narrative for something to happen, but what is this, like 4 or 5? So it is getting a little redundant with these one-on-one Batman and Bane fights. That it's a little more interesting, like you said, with Batman being done playing the game. This is so many times that they fought like this, like he just wants it to be over, and then finding out that, you know, Bane might not actually be the one in control. Boom, boom, boom. You know, moderately interesting.
I tend to agree. I think that the fact that this is the fourth fight between Batman and Bane in this run is a bit of overkill. I think if we just had, the first fight and then the second fight, this would be kind of a good third fight because it's a true fight where Batman wins and mirrors the iconic pose of Nightfall, where Bane holds him above his back and says, "I will break you." But here, because of the fight in The Fall and the Fallen, it feels overdone. And it's necessary. I mean, you do, because Bane hasn't been taken out, you have to take him out.
Yeah.
But I just think this is not necessarily the most engaging way Tom King could have taken him out. I also think that I have no problem with Batman cheating, because Bane's cheated before. Bane, he's a villain, so he's cheated. So Batman cheating to beat him, I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is he just sounds like a really cliched action hero when he says, "I lied." That's not very inspired. That's not very interesting. I've seen it so many times before. So to me, this fight is not bad, but it's also not great. It's not nearly as fun as Batman going through all the villains in the John Romita Jr. villain issues, where he's just like a Western fighter. This just feels kind of like a wrestling brawl.
See, that's the part that almost made the most sense to me, because whenever Batman is like monosyllabic in a fight, that makes sense to me. That's how I see Batman. So whenever I'm seeing Batman like giving a monologue while he's fighting, I'm like, oh my gosh, shut up. Batman wouldn't do that. And then so for the fact that Catwoman's basically quoting Batman in this one to give some, what's the word? Expose. Whatever.
Exposition.
Thank you. That made sense, because that's in her character. That's the way Tom King's really been writing her. So for Batman to just kind of be like, "I lied," that actually, I thought that was the most in character thing he did in the whole thing, other than lying.
I don't think it's out of character. I just think it's boring. I think Tom King should have found something else, like "I win." I'm not a writer, but I've just seen this particular cliche so many times, and I don't feel like it's very fresh in this one. It can be done in a fresh way. I just don't think this was it. So this also has a nice appearance by David Finch on the cover with the reveal, the acetate cover, which, by the sort of side comment, I really like these acetate covers. I've been a fan of all of DC's cover marketing gimmicks that they've been doing sort of in the October November months. Last year it was the foil covers, which were gorgeous. This year it's acetates, where you have two layers. One's like semi-transparent, so you have one image and then you open it and it's got a second image. Second image here is Bane being puppeted by Thomas Wayne, and I think that was a spoiler, but it's also kind of cool because that's what happens in the issue. So it's not a lie. It tells us exactly what's going to happen. What do you guys think about David Finch, who was the original artist for this run of Batman, returning for this cover? This is the last piece he's going to be doing for Tom King's run on Batman.
I thought the cover was great. I thought that, I'm never going to complain about a cover that deals with what actually happens inside the issue. That's never going to happen. I mean, like, obviously, spoilers, because this acetate cover was revealed months and months ago. So there's that. But I think that a lot of people assume that Thomas Wayne was involved in some other way, more than just being a henchman for Bane. But we still have to get the explanation behind all of this as well. And we have just a few issues remaining before the story wraps up. So as far as David Finch returning, I think it's a great piece. I'm not as big of a fan of David Finch as some other people. It's a little bit more gritty than I prefer. And it's not very gritty, but it's just a little bit more gritty than I prefer. But I think that in some of his, I just remember when he was doing Batman the Dark Knight and he did Bane for that, and how Bane looked like...
Well, that was ridiculous.
Yeah,
he was like covered in veins, and it looked like he was an alien from another planet. That was terrible, I agree. But this is much more restrained.
Yes, this is much more restrained. This is actually, like, I would not mind this as a print to frame and put up. I think it's a good piece. I agree that these acetate covers, I think they've done a really good job. I mean, I know that it's obviously just a marketing gimmick and a way to get more money, and I acknowledge that, but I think that a lot of these gimmicks can still be enjoyable if they're done well, and I think they have been doing them well. These acetate covers, I think, are really cool, and this isn't the only one this month. It's just one of the few that we're going to be talking about, but a lot of the acetate covers this month have been really, really good, and they've made really good use of it. And I think it's been better than some of the holographic covers we've seen in the past, or the lenticular covers, or whatever you want to call them, or the foil covers. While they looked great, I think this adds a whole different dimension to the idea of what a cover could, what a cover could do to tell a story. So I think I applaud this cover.
And I do want to point out, even though this is clearly something to get people interested, I mean, I've considered buying comics that I normally wouldn't because of a cover, and these acetates are a good incentive. They aren't raising the price. So unlike the cardstock covers, these are just normal cover price, which is pretty cool of DC, and I want to applaud them for that. Steph, what do you think about the cover?
I don't have much to say about the cover. I mean, it's like, and that's nothing that's already been said. It's nothing that has not already been said. It looks very cool. It is a bit of a spoiler, but at the same time, like at this whole time, you have to be thinking, okay, what is actually going on? So I think it's not that much of a spoiler. And it looks really cool. Yeah.
Okay, and our last question is, how do you think Batman will compare to Thomas in this final conclusion? The big thing that's different, of course, is that Thomas kills. Thomas is willing to go where Batman won't. How do you think Tom King will resolve that conflict and show, I think that we would agree, that Bruce, who doesn't kill, is the better Batman? How do you think that's going to happen?
I think the best way to wrap this up is going to have Psycho Pirate reveal there's a lot of things that we've seen that aren't actually being seen, but I think that in order to have some sort of lasting effect, we have to see Thomas Wayne actually kill somebody. If this is it and he's actually killed Bane, as at least the art shows, he was shot in the head and he's got blood coming out the side of his head while he's laying on the floor, and Bruce is shot in the side. So if this is actually it and Bane is legitimately shot in the head, while we know he will not be dead forever, or at least, whatever, I assume he's not going to be dead forever. I mean,
Chuck Dixon just did a video because people were messaging him, "Oh, you created Bane. Did you know he's dead?" Chuck Dixon's like, "Everyone dies in comics. I'm not upset about this. Go calm down."
Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, like, we know that he's not going to be dead forever, but if the intent was that Thomas killed him with the intent of him being killed, that by itself could show that, Bruce does things differently. But they have to figure out a way, Tom King has to figure out a way to explain why Batman's methods are better than Thomas's. Because as we've seen in other comic characters out there, killing the bad person, is that the better direction to go when all they keep doing, like, it's that constant question of, the Joker has killed all these people, you capture him, you stick him in Arkham Asylum, he escapes, he kills more people. Wouldn't it just be easier to kill the Joker in general? And we've seen that question explored in a variety of different stories over the years, some way more popular than others. But the thing is, Tom King needs to be able to show that the version of Thomas Wayne, or the version of Batman that is Thomas Wayne compared to the Bruce Wayne Batman, Bruce Wayne's reasonings and his methods are better than Thomas Wayne's, which is he just kills them. And I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do that. Bane being shot in the head, I don't feel like it does that by itself, because what is the argument that Bruce is going to say? Like, well, you didn't have to kill him. I could have just broken his back and taken him out. Right, but he'll eventually heal, and he'll maybe get put into a Lazarus pit, and he'll come back more pissed as ever. That's just the constant cycle of these things. So the question is, how do you do that? And I'm not sure I don't have the answer of how that's going to be working. The only thing I can think of is that Thomas used Psychopirate to basically lay out this massive thing that we've all been seeing, and everything we've seen has been this massive dream sequence. I hate to say it, but
that would be the worst.
Oh no!
But just think about it for a second. You've got Batman appearing in all of these other titles. Nobody is addressing what's happening over in Batman. There's hardly any mention of Tom King's story in any other version. And then you've got Thomas Wayne, which we still don't understand why he came to, how he came back, why he's around.
84, guys. Issue 84.
And this is literally, I just feel like this is what's happening. Like, we know that Psychopirate has been involved in this story for a specific reason. What if the entire thing that we've seen is that he is around because he's able to just make this massive illusion, and everything that Batman's been dealing with, it hasn't been addressed in the other titles because it hasn't really been happening. It could explain also why Catwoman left, and her book by itself isn't really addressing things. While she keeps mentioning that she misses Bruce and, all of that, there's a lot of this that could just be all fake. And I'm not necessarily thinking that the reception of something like that is going to go over very well, but I honestly can't see why. And I think that it would make sense for Thomas to be like, this is how it could be, this is how you need to have it, and the whole point was to teach him a lesson. I know that there's lots of people out there who think that Thomas Wayne's Batman is like this ultimate villain for Bruce Wayne. I don't want that, though. I think that I look at Thomas Wayne's Batman and know, yes, he is a much grittier and deadlier version of Bruce Wayne, or of Batman, than Bruce Wayne, but there's still those moments that you've seen, like that we know from Flashpoint and Flashpoint Batman, where he's not all about just being this murderous person who's trying to force his agenda. And I feel like that's what we've seen, but I feel like maybe that's because that's what he wants us to see at this point in time. You know what I'm saying? Like, the Flashpoint Batman, he refused to go after Martha Wayne's Joker because it was his wife. Even if she was crazy and even if she was doing all of the bad things that she was doing, it was his wife, and he chalked it up to the grief that she had for Bruce dying. The letter that he writes Bruce Wayne at the very end of Flashpoint. Both of those things happen, and they show that this character has good aspects to the character. He's not just evil. He's not just straight evil. But everything we've been seeing since he popped up, in the last pages of Batman number 50 has been, he is this evil person who's been working alongside Bane and doing these horrific things. And I don't think that that's the character. So while I could be completely wrong, I feel like this maybe has been this massive teachable lesson for Bruce Wayne as to, why he needs to have a family, which was, going back to the button, that was his message to Bruce. Stop doing what you're doing, be Batman, or, you don't need to be Batman, go have a family, live your life. That's what he's telling Bruce. Bruce doesn't do it, so he decides he's going to enact this massive plan by linking up with Bane and doing this, and that's the only thing I can think of how you can explain all of this, because, let's be honest, I don't think that Thomas Wayne is as evil as Tom King has been writing him, and I don't think he's, I think he's well above the point of shooting Alfred in the head to get his point across, killing the Bat family, or leaving them for dead or whatever. I think there's too many things that have happened in this story that don't make a lot of sense, that could easily be chalked up to, well, it's not real. And while I'm positive the reception is not going to be kind, it just feels like that's the only way this can go. I can't think of another reason, honestly, and let's just hope that Thomas Wayne achieves his point by having, and maybe the whole point was that Batman can't, he doesn't need to be alone, and now that he was working alongside Catwoman and having Catwoman help him in the fight against Bane, Thomas has got to the point where he realizes that, okay, he's where I want him to be. I want him to understand. I might not get him to stop being Batman, but maybe he can acknowledge that he doesn't have to be alone. And that's the moment, the teachable moment that he needed to learn.
I think the precedent for these years of commitment have been a dream being hated is too popular for King to do that. I really hope that it's all been a dream, because I think the backlash would be too high. But I definitely think you're right in that this has got to be more than just, this is not your villain of the month. Obviously, this has been going on since 2016. So this is villain of the last entire 3 years. So I really hope it is more emotional. I think we've had enough of the combat at this point, and I don't think. Yeah, I think it's definitely something more emotional that is Thomas's motivation. I watch a lot of anime and read a lot of manga. And one thing that's very common in that is bad guys that you're introduced to always have this sob backstory and there's all these excuses for why they do what they do. And whereas that doesn't excuse any violent or criminal behavior, you still kind of, your heart goes out to them in a way. And so here I think, Bane's definitely that kind of character. And even though, being trapped as a kid in Santa Prisca doesn't excuse being a jerk as an adult or a criminal, you still kind of care that, oh, I'm sorry you went through that, but that's no excuse to, attack Batman. And then so Thomas's has got to be way, way more, because he's seeing his, like you said, his child make all these choices where he's alone and he's fighting and he's just in this downward spiral of fighting crime and crime apparently never going away. That's a common, from what I've seen, a common story in Batman is Batman the crazier one for fighting crime every night and it never stopping. And I think Thomas maybe just has had enough of seeing that and wants to in some way solve it his way. And I don't know if I agree if it's a battle about which Batman is better, because I think both of them make mistakes and don't do things. They're both vigilantes. They're both acting outside the law. Neither of them are technically legally right. So, but Thomas using murder as a weapon definitely is not cool. But I don't know where I was going with all this. But just to say that I really hope it is more emotional. It is more in depth than just you do what I say because I'm your father. But I have high hopes. I think we've hopefully seen the end of a lot of the combat, and that what's left is a deep emotional behind the scenes reveal of what's been going on and the motivations behind it.
I agree. I think that if it is all agree, so I've said before, if Tom King ends his story, and I do want to go on record by saying I don't think Batman 85 is going to be the end of the story. To me, the end is going to be Batman Catwoman number 12. But if Tom King ends his story with Batman distrusting Catwoman and them broken up and there's no connection between them anymore, I'm not going to hate the whole run because I still think there's really good issues in it. But as a whole, I think that will be a waste. Similar to the way I am frustrated with Hush because Jeff Loeb spends so much time building a Batman and Catwoman and then he just throws it all away for no good reason at the end. However, if this is all a dream, if all 85 issues were a dream, or even if just since number 50, if the last 35 issues are a dream, I'll also sort of reject the run. That's something I don't accept as good writing. I think It Was All a Dream is almost always a very bad solution to writing yourself into a corner. And as much as it frustrates me, the solicitations for the Death of Alfred and the Detective Comics Annual indicate to me that this is not all a dream, that Alfred is indeed dead. So that's going to be something against the idea that it was all a dream. I do agree with Dustin, though, that this is clearly supposed to be a lesson to Bruce. I just don't think it's necessarily a dream lesson. I think it's supposed to be a very brutal lesson of hard knocks from Thomas, from father to son. As I was joking earlier, Thomas is supposed to get his backstory, how he's in this universe and what his motivations are in issue number 84. So I am hoping that Dustin is right, and this isn't just Thomas is a mustache-twirling evil villain. I think we saw hints of that in The Fall and the Fallen. His motivation to resurrect Martha, I think that's a more relatable thing. It's not a villainous thing. It's similar to what we've been talking about in the Detective Comics review with Mr. Freeze. I mean, his whole motivation is to save his wife. So Thomas's motivation to resurrect his wife is relatable, and it's not just sort of an evil thing. But I do think we need more complexity, more explanation for what's going on with that. That being said, let's give our ratings for this issue. Dustin, what do you give this?
I'm going to give this one 4 out of 5. I think that I love the art. Mikel Janin, his art is really clean. And I think that the pacing of the story was done very well, and the moment at the end was also done very well. But I think that the entire build-up and the entire story itself was done very well. So I'm going to give it 4 out of 5.
3.5 out of 5. I don't know exactly what I found a little disappointing. Exposition, large exposition sometimes, I don't know, gets me in. And a lot of what Catwoman, well, I guess it was just Catwoman really kind of explaining a few things. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but 3.5. I wasn't feeling that this was a 4 to me.
I'm with Steph. I'm giving this a 3.5 out of 5 batarangs. I thought the art was very good. I thought the writing was a little cliched, and that's sort of what brings it down for me. I also didn't see it saying a whole lot new about the characters. I did like the parallel between Bane and Batman in I Am Bane, where Batman and Bane both say, I'm still here, and that's kind of a cool callback, but it still doesn't say anything really profound about the characters, so I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5.
All right, and over on the site, Paul gave it 4.5. So that's going to give Batman number 82 a total of 3.5 out of 5 batarangs. That means we're going to jump over to our next book, which is Detective Comics.
At Wayne Manor, Bruce Wayne, Alfred Pennyworth, and Lucius Fox frantically work on a cure to revive the victims of Mr. Freeze. Meanwhile, Victor Freeze trains the newly revived Nora on how to use a freeze gun, with the promise that with just a few major heists, the two can secure enough money and retire. During their heists, Victor notices the cruelty in Nora he never knew she had in her. Worst of all, she seems to be enjoying their crime spree. Days later, Lucius finally discovers a serum that may undo the damage Mr. Freeze has wrought on his victims. Before he can use it, he must test it, and Bruce volunteers. Alfred reluctantly freezes Bruce's arm, and Lucius injects the serum. The serum works, sort of. Bruce's arm thaws, but the nerves are dead, rendering it useless. At the Gotham Pine Barrens, Victor tells Nora that they are ready for an adventure up to Alaska. They have enough money, and they can now start a life anew. Nora pushes Victor away. Again, he is dictating her every action, telling her what she must do, and puppeting her next steps. Nora is disgusted with it and tells Victor she's leaving. When Victor threatens to follow her to the ends of the earth, she freezes him. Finding no more answers in the Batcave regarding the serum, a one-armed Batman suits up and hits the streets. He finds Mr. Freeze waiting for him on the Gotham Police Department rooftop. Victor tells Batman about the gift he was given from Lex Luthor and how he used it to resurrect Nora. He tells Batman how she's changed and how he needs Batman's help in finding her. Batman agrees to help Victor once Victor fixes Batman's arm and perfects the serum to save those victims Lucius, Bruce, and Alfred have been working tirelessly to cure. At the Mount Hope Cemetery, Nora Freeze builds a mausoleum on ice above her dead parents' graves. She bows and tells them that she has big plans for the future. Do we have any questions?
Well, I think that my question is the same as I keep asking. And unfortunately, to me, I look at where Nora's going, and this is kind of the least interesting direction it could go, because I think that Batman and Freeze are going to have to refreeze her because she's gone too evil. And that's going to leave Mr. Freeze in exactly the same spot that he was before the arc. And that's disappointing, because I was really hoping that we could find a new status quo for him for at least a couple years. But if they have to refreeze Nora, then she's just...
Why would they have to refreeze her?
Because she's too evil. She's going to destroy the world.
You
or
don't
something.
freeze evil people. You put them in prison.
This is a freeze arc. They're going to freeze her again.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there's no other direction. It's just the problem is that this initial idea was that we were going to get a new status quo with Mr. Freeze, and obviously Nora was involved in that, but I don't see this going in a new direction or a new status quo for the character. I feel like this is just going to be an arc that reverts back to square one at the end, and that's it. And then the question is, what does Mr. Freeze do going forward, knowing that he can't actually get her, he can't thaw her out because she doesn't want him, she doesn't want to be around him anymore. So then what purpose does he have? Because as it's laid out here, and as he has said in this story, he only does what he does not because he's in it for the money or he enjoys committing crimes or anything like that. He's only been doing all of what he's been doing so that he could bring her back. He needed money to bring her back, or he needed items to bring her back, and that's why he's done everything that he's done. So the thing is, if she has to get, frozen, she has to go back to being frozen, and he doesn't have a purpose, then what does he need to do, or what purpose does he serve? Is he still going to be a villain that is even a threat, or are they going to ignore this story the next time they want to bring him back into the forefront? That's the problem I have with this story. It just doesn't feel like, it felt like it could have gone somewhere, and now it feels like we're just going back to getting Mr. Freeze back to the same situation so that when somebody else wants to use Mr. Freeze, they can say he's frozen and kind of ignore this arc. And whenever you're writing an arc that the intent is that it can be forgotten in the future, what's the point?
I don't think they're going to freeze Nora. I think either... Because the serum or whatever Lex Luthor gave Victor, it obviously had the side effect, possibly, of making Nora really, really love crime. But I kind of stick to my old opinion, which was if Victor was capable of committing these crimes to save his wife, the ends justify the means, then I feel like he would have picked a life partner that felt similar to him. And so I don't think she was as pure as the driven snow as we were maybe led to believe. I
agree.
I'm okay with her being a bad person, and I feel like, as a married woman reading this, I kind of agree with her. I mean, just a little bit. I mean, he's got all these plans, and to his defense, he's been for years and years and years trying to save her. He's had to work all this on his own. He's had to have these expectations and these plans working without her because she's been frozen. So I sympathize with him, but I also agree with her that just because those were his plans doesn't mean that that's what she wants to do or those are her plans. And so I feel like some marriage counseling would fix most of their problems. And then they could be this evil duo that could work things out. I don't think it's hopeless is what I guess I'm trying to say is that I think we could get a new status quo Victor Freeze and not either go back to where we started or have him just be completely off the table.
My problem with that is that it feels too much like Tomasi has set the direction when Freeze teams up with Batman. I don't see him finding marriage counseling and having Freeze have a new status quo, which I agree would be more interesting and I think would be good. But the fact that Victor halfway through the issue is like, oh, Batman, she's too evil, I need your help, that I don't see a way back from that in terms of figuring out a way. And maybe if there were more issues left in the arc, I might think that, but I don't to me, the way he set up the story in this issue sort of determines that they're going to refreeze her and it's just going to be new status quo.
I don't know. I think that that's his whole shtick, is saving his wife, and he will do whatever it takes. That ends justifies the means. And so if catering to Batman and doing the right thing in the law's eyes to get Batman to team with him to save his wife is what he has to do, that's what he's going to do. I still have hope for evil for evil to reign and live another day. I don't know. I'm not too disappointed.
Yeah, and I don't think there's that much else to say about this issue. Yeah, there was an excellent point that Scott brought up in his review online about this is a story arc that was hinted at for such a long period of time. In those few pages at the end of during the last arc that we had in Detective Comics before Mr. Freeze really came to be the main focus. They kept hinting for just a couple of pages each issue, and all of that hinting was for this. It was a good point that Scott brought up, and I honestly thought to myself the same thing. Like, what was it? Feels like this, and I hate to say this because I feel like we've said this a couple of times over the past few months, but with Peter Tomasi's run, it really does feel like he keeps having these ideas, and something is stopping them from really becoming more than they are. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the potential of DC having some major thing happening in the future where all the books are getting shook up. I don't know if it's because of the conflicts with characters or directions of some of the characters, in the next few months. There's always been that question of, obviously, Tom King selling Batman is outselling Detective Comics, so Batman becomes the main Batman title of that gets the most focus. But none of the other books are really addressing a lot of the stuff that's happening in Tom King's run. And a lot of the other books just continue to carry on as if the giant fiasco that is City of the Bane that is occurring isn't really happening. Why is it that this book, Detective Comics, isn't able to do stories that actually make a difference and not just get reverted back to it? I mean, like, every story arc that we've seen from Peter Tomasi since 1000 has, well, even the story arc that he did prior to 1000, every story arc that he's done has gotten back to none of what you're seeing really matters. We are just continuing on, and I'm not real sure why. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know if he was brought on just to fill up time or what, because I didn't think that was the case.
Because this is a Year of the Villain story, right? So
yes.
Do you think the outcomes were dictated to them, or do you think they said, "Here's your villain, do what you want"?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we all know that the vast majority of the series that are releasing are tie into Year of the Villains in some way. At least the top, 50% of all the titles that are releasing by DC are part of the Year of Villain. I don't know if it was like, okay, we want some villain. I'm sure. My feeling is this: the writers who are on these main titles are like, well, we want them to team up, to fall in line with Year of the Villain, and because they're falling in line with Year of the Villain, we in turn want to make sure that that we have stories revolving around specific villains in each of the books. We don't want anybody stepping on top of each other. We don't want anybody to do anything that's groundbreaking to the sense of it's its own thing. But at the same time, we do want good stories. So they probably went to the writers that were involved in these different books that they want tied in and said, what villain do you want to use? And they probably got to choose what villain they want to use. I'm sure of it, because while Batman is not, technically it's focusing on Bane, and that event just happens to fall in line with Year of the Villain, it doesn't necessarily have it's not Year of the Villain. Like, we're not seeing stuff that's happening in Year of the Villain. I mean, the biggest call out is the Legion of Doom green symbol that keeps popping up in the clouds in all of the books. or in the sky, that keeps popping up in all the books, but it's not happening in Batman. And that's the other thing that leads to my idea of everything that we're seeing is not actually happening, because why is that not happening, but it's happening in all of the other titles? But besides that, the thing is, it just comes down to what is the purpose of some of these stories if there's no real repercussions? What was the point of focusing on villains? What was the point of having Year of the Villain if the villains that are getting the focus just are back where they were before? I thought the whole point was to, have some sort of unique difference. We've seen that with some of them. Black Mask is a different character after that one shot. Riddler is a different character. Some of these characters, they have differences that make more sense. The other thing that I find extremely annoying about this Mr. Freeze story is that, Lex Luthor comes to Mr. Freeze and says, I can give you anything you want. And he says, okay, I want my wife back. And he goes, okay, snaps his fingers or whatever, and Nora can come back. But Freeze then uses some explanation as to why she turned evil, why she had to have, why she ended up having to get frozen and all of that, because what Luthor did wasn't enough. But why would that be? Why would, why would Lex Luthor, who has basically the abilities to do whatever he wants, and in some titles we've seen him give a lot more reign over, whatever the villain's asking for, but Mr. Freeze just gets like one part of 3 to get his wife to come back, and conveniently the other 2 things is what's really going to screw up the entire thing. I don't know. It's the convenience factor. It's just, it's too convenient for this to be happening the way it is.
I just chalked it up to him being a scientist and he wanted to do a little more tweaking.
Yeah. All right. So Detective Comics, I'm going to give Detective Comics 2.5 out of 5.
That's what I was thinking. I do I have hope. But yeah, 2.5 is what I was thinking.
2.5 as well.
And over on the site, Scott gave it 2 out of 5, so it's going to give Detective Comics number 1015 a total of 2.5 out of 5 batarangs. That is all of our books. Like I said, we're not going to be covering Greater Gotham going forward, at least for the next couple episodes while I'm around. And like I said, I want these episodes to be just a tad bit shorter than they have been. So I'm going to end the podcast with a specific request. We have listeners. Some of you have taken the time over the past years to send us an email or send us comments, either on Discord or Twitter or Facebook or wherever you're interacting with us. But then there's also the website as well. And going forward, one of the changes that's going to be happening to TBU is we're not going to be having a comment section on the website. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on trying to grow our Discord and having interactions over on our Discord rather than trying to separate conversations over on the website as well. So because of that, listener comments in general are going to be, specifically taken from Discord, and conversations and discussion points that are discussed in the TBU Comic Podcast channel over on Discord. That all being said, there was a comment that came in very recently that, let's just put it bluntly, it wasn't kind. It was kind of mean-spirited, talking about how we were praising a book that doesn't deserve praise, and they weren't going to listen to the Comic Cast until either that changed or the person talking about the book was off the cast. Let me be clear. We're here for you guys to listen, but we're here because we want to be here and because we want to share our views and discussion points with you guys, the listeners. You're not always going to agree with us. As we've seen over the years, we've gotten a number of negative comments about how negative we are. Like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to, the New 52, we were extremely negative about a lot of the stuff that was going on. And stuff like that isn't going to change. If, like I said earlier, we are always going to be a podcast that voices our personal opinions. Depending on who the hosts are, it's their opinions. We are not the type of podcast that's going to just go along with the crowd. So if we really like something, we're going to say we really like it. If we don't really like it, we're going to say we really don't like it. This is not a podcast where we cater to every single person. It's not. I mean, some of us are going to, amongst the hosts, we have disagreed on viewpoints when it comes to certain stories and things like that. There's no question about that. That's happened with this group of hosts. It's happened with past group of hosts. It's happened a lot, and it's going to happen. And we hope that by having differing opinions on the podcast, it creates more of a discussion and more of an interesting podcast to listen to. Because if we all had the exact same opinion on every single book, then it would probably be pretty boring. So while we have no intention of trying to cater to every single one of our listeners, we do appreciate our listeners, and we do want to hear from you guys. So specifically, because things are we're kind of in the process of planning things out for the future, we would like you guys to send in your comments about what you would like the Comic Cast to be, what you would like us to cover. If you'd like us to cover more books, if you'd like us to cover less books, if you'd like us to cover or be more frequent, like with, maybe being weekly instead of bi-weekly, or being less, maybe being monthly instead of twice a month. We'd like to hear your viewpoint of what you would like to see out of the TBU Comic Podcast. We'd also like to know whether or not there are other podcasts out there that you guys are currently listening to that maybe aren't Batman related, but their format or the things that they do or the way they run their podcast is something you would like to see applied over to TBU. And we're looking for our listeners to kind of help create the new idea of what TBU is. We have some ideas of how we'd like to make things happen, but we would like your guys' input. Like I said, the only thing that's really set in stone at this point is that we're going to make these episodes shorter in length. No longer 2-hour podcasts. We're going to try to make them about an hour long. And I think that's entirely possible. But if there's something that you'd like to see differently with how we cover the individual comics, how we, in the discussion points that we talk about, if you like an ongoing segment, obviously we've tried different things. We've had Monkey Watch, we've had listener Q&As. Some of those only work if we have feedback from the listeners, but there are other things that could be ongoing segments that people could suggest that we could be interested in hearing. So what we want to know is, what things do you guys as the listeners want to see? What do you want to hear us discussing? How often? How much do you guys want us to be discussing things like that? I can tell you up front, like I said earlier, comic news is no longer going to be covered specifically on this podcast. And it's not to say that we won't be having discussions about big things that get announced, but in general, we will be leaving the news off of the podcast going forward. There's a lot more focus on trying to have discussions rather than just having a rundown of the news. So, but we still, there's a lot of possibilities here, and we want to hear what you guys want us to do. Now, that's not to say that every single person who sends in an email, we're going to do exactly what every single person says, because that's not the case. We're just trying to get ideas to think outside of the three of us and the staff at the site who we've been talking about this. We're trying to just get a broader idea of ideas of what we can do for the Comic Cast going forward. So you, in the future, while the website will continue to have comments, you can certainly leave your comments over there. We would strongly suggest that you go over to Discord. There is a channel specifically for the TBU Comic Podcast, and that is where we would like you to make these suggestions. We'll probably also be creating a channel somewhere, but I encourage you one way or the other just to join the Discord. Interact with us as hosts, interact with the other staff and the reviewers of the comics over on the site. If there's books that you're reading, we want you to interact and talk about the books. So join the Discord, because that is where we are pushing our focus towards going forward as far as interaction with the fans. In addition to that, if you're not interested in joining the Discord, but you still like to share your thoughts for the Comic Cast, you can email us at podcast@thebatmanuniverse.net. That is the email that we will be using going forward for all of the podcast feedback outside of just obviously social media and our Discord. So use that email. Again, podcast@thebatmanuniverse.net is where you can get in touch with us. So with all of that being said, I do want to encourage you guys to head over to the site for all kinds of content related to movies, TV, merchandise, video games, and of course the comics. Be sure to check out all the other podcasts that we have to offer at TBU, because there is a ton of podcasts that we do offer. Some focusing on other aspects of comics, some focusing on other aspects outside of comics. So be sure to check out all of those podcasts. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can hear these podcasts all over the place, as well as including YouTube. And if you are so inclined, we would greatly appreciate 5-star reviews over on any podcast platform that you're currently listening to us on. But if you don't think the show deserves a 5-star review, we would encourage you to also send us an email and explain what you think could be better, because we are always wanting to hear from you guys of what you'd like to see, because while we have an idea of what we want to accomplish, we want to produce something that people actually want to listen to. So with all of that being said, outside of everything else, I will be around for the next couple episodes, and if you have any questions, you can interact with me over on our Discord as well. Like I said, we'll be revealing a lot more details about TBU's direction in the coming episodes and the coming months. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can get in touch with us. If you are so inclined to join up with TBU staff, you can email me at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net, and we will try to find a new spot for you. If you are a person who is so inclined to support us, we're going to be doing, because of a lot of the changes that we're going through, we are definitely looking for funds. As you have probably seen, we have added some new ads onto the site that is to hopefully raise some funds for some of the upcoming changes to TBU and as a whole. If you are currently supporting us on Patreon, we greatly appreciate your support, but we do have a variety of different ways you can support TBU. You can either buy merchandise, which we get proceeds from. You can support us monthly on Patreon. You can also give us a one-time donation via PayPal. If you go over the site, at the top of the page in the menu bar, there's a spot that says show your support for TBU. That basically lists all of the different ways that you can support us, and we greatly appreciate all the support that we do get. That is something that we really do appreciate, and we hope that the support can grow so that we can do more, as we've always said. But in the meantime, we are currently looking for support specifically to grow what and in this new direction that we're trying to accomplish. So all that being said, this has been the Batman Universe Comic Podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.